Hello, everyone. I'm Cory Puffett, and it is week 9 of the 2021 NFL season. Washington's schedule is perfectly split down the middle as they take this midseason bye, so we're taking this opportunity for a midseason report on our Washington football team and the greater NFL. Jonathan Coachman sat down with Washington's owner this week to talk about expectations for the second half of the season after Washington finished the first half at 4-4. Daniel Snyder expressed concern over the lack of consistency thus far, but also appears confident that the team can find it and ultimately make the playoffs. Washington reached extension agreements with several of their players over the first half of the season. We've mentioned some of them in game, but we want to make sure to talk about all of them. In addition to the most notable re-signings that you see here on your screen, Washington has also reached 2-year agreements with kicker Dustin Hopkins and middle linebacker John Bostic for $4.2 million and $3.4 million respectively. Meanwhile, defensive tackle Tim Settle plans to test free agency. Ryan Anderson and Greg Stroman are both reportedly locked in negotiations with the team, and Washington is expected to begin the process of bringing back several other notable players, including Jerron Christian Sr., Troy Apke, and Dylan Cantrell. Washington has been a pretty good offensive team this year. Despite some teams still yet to have their bye week, they rank third in points scored. Defensively, there have been some struggles though. Even with many teams already playing their 9th game ahead of Washington, they rank bottom 3 in points and yards allowed. Meanwhile, individually, Washington is led by Terry McLaurin, who ranks first in yards and touchdowns and second in receptions. Antonio Gibson has been heavily involved and ranks 4th in rushing yards and 1st in carries. Taylor Heinicke is just outside the top 10 in yards and touchdowns, but his 13 interceptions have him ranked way down in 40th in passer rating, though that does become 32nd if you eliminate anybody with fewer than 75 passing attempts. Terry McLaurin is in the running for NFC Offensive Player of the Year, but as expected, 5 quarterbacks top that list, and Christian McCaffrey also sits ahead of him. Despite a fairly limited role, Matt Vernon is currently 5th in the running for Offensive Rookie of the Year, but Falcons rookie running back Rashad Parker out of Kentucky leads the way thanks in part to his 5 rushing touchdowns. Antonio Gibson currently sits behind only Christian McCaffrey in the running for best running back in the NFC. Considering he's the top wide receiver on the Offensive Player of the Year list, it should come as no surprise that Terry McLaurin leads the way for best wide receiver, and Michael Thomas isn't a particularly close second. Montez Sweat isn't in the top 10 for Defensive Player of the Year in the NFC, but he is currently the favorite to win Best Defensive Lineman in the conference. He's currently tied for 4th in the NFL with 7 sacks, and only one other NFC player is in that top group of 5. Nickel Roby-Coleman and Darius Slay Jr. lead the way among defensive backs thus far, but Cameron Curl and Kendall Fuller are currently 3rd and 4th in the list of favorites for best defensive back in the NFC. They each have 3 interceptions, which ties the NFL lead, and a fumble recovery, and Fuller has 2 defensive touchdowns on the season, which leads the NFL. Dustin Hopkins is also in line for a postseason award. He's 14 for 14 on field goals this season, one of only 3 kickers without a miss on more than 10 attempts, and is 17 for 17 on extra points, making him and Justin Tucker the only kickers in the NFL with no misses on more than 30 total kicks. It's a long way from that very bad shank, if you guys remember it, in the preseason. Saints quarterback Nick Mullins is the current favorite for MVP. One might make an argument that Lamar Jackson has had the better season thus far, but Jackson only has 19 rushing attempts through 8 games, putting him on pace for a career low by more than 100 attempts, and has not been as involved in the Ravens' offense as Mullins has in the Saints. Still, Jackson has 3 more touchdown passes and 5 fewer interceptions than Mullins, so he probably should be ahead of him. Meanwhile, John Harbaugh had been the favorite to win NFL Coach of the Year until this past week, and we'll get into that later. But currently leading the conversation is Green Bay Packers head coach Matt LaFleur. Looking back to Week 8, Despite his 2 interceptions, Aaron Rodgers won Offensive Player of the Week in the NFC after the comeback victory against San Francisco. The 49ers defense played very well in the first half though, and Fred Warner was recognized as the conference's Defensive Player of the Week for an interception and for being everywhere on the field during the game. On the AFC side, we pointed out Lamar Jackson's 5-touchdown performance in the postgame last time, so it should come as no surprise that he is the Offensive Player of the Week in the AFC. Demarius Randall also was recognized in our last video for his pick 6 that helps the Raiders beat the Colts. The Raiders and the Broncos kicked off Week 9 in the Mile High City. The Raiders easily outgained the home team offensively, and it certainly didn't help that Melvin Gordon had exactly 17 rushing yards on exactly 17 carries. The Raiders' best offensive weapon of the game, Henry Ruggs, had 7 catches for 99 yards, but went down late with a foot fracture that will keep him off the field for about 8 weeks. He joins Will Fuller and Shaquille Griffin on the Raiders' growing injury list. Derek Carr's 2 interceptions may have made the difference in the Broncos' 28-14 victory. The Giants were in Jerry World to face the Cowboys this week. The final score was fairly close, with Dallas winning 30-22, but the Cowboys outgained their opponent by nearly 200 yards in the contest. Passing wasn't a big focus for either team, and 5 of the game's 6 touchdowns were scored on the ground. Ezekiel Elliott recorded one of those on a 93-yard touchdown run, part of a big day for the veteran running back. The NFL's last unbeaten is no more. I mentioned earlier that John Harbaugh had been the Coach of the Year frontrunner until this week, and this is why. His Ravens lost on the road to the Bengals. Joe Burrow had a solid performance with 2 touchdown passes to 1 interception, but the star of the game was their other Joe Mixon, who ran for $126 and 3 touchdowns in the 35-19 victory. The Colts' struggles continued in New York this week. Colin Kaepernick played well with 321 passing yards and a pair of touchdowns, but it wasn't enough. Sam Darnold had a solid game throwing the ball despite no touchdown passes, but he did add a rushing touchdown to the ledger as part of a 21 fourth-quarter effort to win 27-24. Jordan Hicks and Emmanuel Mosley both baited Ben Roethlisberger into picks on Sunday, but the Steelers quarterback in his 18th year bounced back to throw 3 touchdown passes. Eric Ebron and Chase Claypool both had over 100 receiving yards in the game, and the Steelers pulled off their own fourth-quarter comeback to win 31-28 against the Lions. In another fourth-quarter comeback, the 49ers scored 14 unanswered in the fourth quarter to beat the Eagles 21-14 in Philadelphia. Raheem Mostert had a good day on the ground, nearly cracking 5 yards per carry, but Jimmy G and Deebo Samuel double as players of the game as they connected for all 3 San Francisco touchdowns in the win. Minnesota outgained Chicago by 100 yards this week, and Kirk Cousins outdueled Mitchell Trubisky pretty easily, but the Vikings' offensive line struggled and Kirk Cousins spent a lot of time on his backside. Khalil Mack recorded 2 of Chicago's 5 sacks, and though Rashard Higgins did everything he could, recording 146 yards on just 4 catches, including an 84-yard touchdown reception, it wasn't enough as the Vikings fell to the Bears 24-14. Despite their poor record, the Cardinals have a lot of fight in them. They pushed the Packers to overtime on Sunday thanks to interceptions by Patrick Peterson, Budda Baker, and Cameron Sutton. Rodgers has been a second-half monster though and finished with 384 yards and a pair of touchdowns to MVS and Robert Tonyan to clinch the 23-17 overtime victory. Sunday Night Football saw Tom Brady's first matchup with the Bills since leaving New England. He demolished his old team last week, but the Bills got the better of his Bucs up in Western New York. Brady and Allen both threw for 2 touchdowns and no picks, and Chris Godwin was the offensive player of the game with 124 yards and a touchdown on 11 catches, but Stephon Diggs was the difference maker. He scored a touchdown on one of just 4 catches, and that touchdown covered half of his 52 receiving yards, but he also recorded a 65-yard punt return touchdown in the fourth quarter that proved the difference in a 34-27 victory. And closing out the week with Monday Night Football, the Chiefs played host to the Titans, and it was a great game. Both quarterbacks topped 300 passing yards, but Tannehill doubled up Mahomes with 4 touchdown passes. Derrick Henry continues to be effective if underused, recording only 11 carries but averaging 6.5 yards per, and Olivier Vernon was a big asset to the Titans as he reached Mahomes twice for sacks in the win. Bit of a different video this time out, but if you've enjoyed this video and the series as a whole, leave a like and a comment below. Let me know what I can improve on, and be sure to subscribe for more content. My name is Cory Puffett, and this has been the midseason recap during Washington's bye week. Join me next time as Washington travels to Philadelphia to face the Eagles in a rematch of Week 1's loss in an attempt to get above 500.